Alright, so the next topic of research is going to be the elucidation of the terms extracted from the key terms of Freud's Die Verneinung. So what I have down is negation, which is going to be the first one I'm going to start with. So negation, no subject, which is an excellent online resource for Lacanian terms. So, on no subject negation, Sigmund Freud. For Freud, the term negation meant both logical negation and the action of denial. Jacques Lacan. Lacan takes up Freud's concept of negation in his seminar of 1953 to 1954 and in his seminar of 1955 to 1956. Bejahung. Lacan argues that negation is an erotic process that can only occur after a fundamental act of affirmation called bejahung. Foreclosure. Negation must be distinguished from foreclosure, which is a kind of primitive negation prior to any possible Verneinung, a refusal of bejahung itself. Right. Next is perhaps going to be bejahung. Again on the same resource. Affirmation. In his reply to Jean Hippolyte's commentary on Freud's negation, 1954, Lacan describes the primordial act of affirmation which is logically prior to any act of negation. Lacan uses Freud's German term, Bejahung, to denote this primordial affirmation. Existence. Whereas negation concerns what Freud called the judgment of existence, Bejahung denotes something more fundamental, namely the primordial act of symbolization itself, the inclusion of something in the symbolic universe. Only after a thing has been symbolized at the level of Bejahung can the value of existence be attributed to it or not. Negation. Foreclosure. Lacan posits a basic alternative between Bejahung and the psychotic mechanism he later calls foreclosure. Bejahung designates a primordial inclusion of something in the symbolic, whereas foreclosure is a primordial refusal to include something, the name of the father, in the symbolic. Okay. No subject. No, I can't find it. Let's just look up the term. Autism is not psychosis, a case for the singularity of autism. Okay. From Verneinung to unary trait. Interesting. Lacan's concept of the real. Okay. I think there's something on this here. Find in page. Right, excellent. So, I'm reading an article on touching the real, psychoanalysis and its discontents. I went to the find function in the page to make the research particular, so I'll start directly from the sentence that includes what I'm looking for. Right. In his response to Jean Hippolyte's commentary on Freud's Verneinung negation paper, Lacan gives what is perhaps the most recognized and possibly most misunderstood definition of the real. For that is how we must understand Einbeziehung, ins Ich, taking into the subject, and Ausstoßung, aus dem Ich, expelling from the subject. The latter constitutes the real insofar as it is the domain of that which subsists outside of symbolization. In other words, the real is that which is outside of symbolization, that which cannot be represented. This is often taken to mean that the real is outside of language itself, whereas in fact, and as I will argue later on in this article, the real is essentially a function of language. Not bad? Okay. Picture. I believe I already read this. Let me just verify that I have. No, I don't think so. Yes, I did. Okay, what is left? Verdrangung. Lacan term. Right. I have something here on Wikipedia. Where is it though in the article? I'll just read. Is it worth doing the whole thing? Yeah, okay, sure. Foreclosure, psychoanalysis, also known as foreclusion, French foreclusion, is the English translation of a term that the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan introduced into psychoanalysis to identify a specific psychical cause for psychosis. History. According to Elisabeth Rudinesco, the term was originally introduced into psychology in 1928 when Edouard Pichon published in Pierre Janet's review his article on the psychological significance of negation in French, and borrowed the legal term foreclusif to indicate facts that the speaker no longer sees as part of reality. According to Christophe Laudou, the term was introduced by Damourette and Pichon. Freud versus Laforgue. The publication took part against the background of the 1920s dispute between Freud and René Laforgue over scotomization, which that a psychological term for the mental blocking of unwanted perceptions, analogous to the visual blindness of an actual scotoma. If I am not mistaken, Freud wrote in 1927, Laforgue would say in this case that the boy scotomizes his perception of the woman's lack of a penis. A new technical term is justified when it describes a new fact or emphasizes it. This is not the case here. Freud went on to suggest that if one wanted to reserve the word Verdrangung, repression, for the affect, here it is, then the correct German word for the vicissitude of the idea would be Verlungen, disavow. Alright. What's left? Verwerfung. Verwerfung. Okay. Perhaps I should continue this article then. Yeah, okay. Lacan's introduction of foreclosure. In 1938, Lacan relates the origin of psychosis to an exclusion of the father from the family structure, thereby reducing this structure to a mother-child relationship. Later on, when working on the distinctions between the real, imaginary, and symbolic father, he specifies that it is the absence of the symbolic father which is linked to psychosis. Lacan uses the Freudian term Verwerfung, which the Standard Edition translates as repudiation, as a specific defense mechanism different from repression, Verdrangung, in which the ego rejects the incompatible idea with its affect and behaves as if the idea has never occurred to the ego at all. In 1954, basing himself on a reading of The Wolfman, Lacan identifies Verwerfung as the specific mechanism of psychosis where an element is rejected outside the symbolic order, as if it has never existed. In 1956, in his seminar on psychoses, he translates Verwerfung as foreclusion, that is, foreclosure. Let us extract from several of Freud's texts a term that is sufficiently articulated in them to designate in them a function of the unconscious that is distinct from the repressed. Let us take as demonstrated the essence of my seminar on the psychoses, namely, that this term refers to psychosis. This term is Verwerfung, foreclosure. So perhaps the initial position is incorrect, though I would suggest insisting and demonstrating later where the convergence point extracts from the error and near miss attributable so that the outside of the Bromian knot can still be accessible from within it. So the last term is unerträglich Darstellung. Okay. Unerträglich. I can't find anything, but Darstellung seems to translate to diagram or illustration, right? So the expulsion of the imaginary scene on the axis in full bolded arrow point from up to down between the A prime and standard A. So the world and its opposite, or the semblant of the identification with itself that makes the real impossible, would be at this juncture point the interest in distinguishing between expulsion as a non-omission category that can perhaps in treatment even orient the deconstruction of Derrida towards an ending of his treatment, say there were to be one, in the event of his death on his structures. This is where at this point, though in a space of while I wait, I'll be reading Kant's What is Enlightenment as a primer towards any possible treatment of the sublime in Hegel. That is, where the ruse of the real is the rational becomes the stupidest proposition after its institution works. Where is the operation point of the know-how in the analyst situated outside of the actual in terms of truth, but inside the structure in terms of the topographies after dissolution?